Good evening, Malaysia, and good morning to America. Good morning and good afternoon to Europe. So, everyone, welcome to the Kuala Lumpur Photography Online Festival. It's, we have gone online this year, and we started from the 19th August, and it will last until 19th September with more than 100 sessions of dialogues and seminars, all on our Facebook page, the Kuala Lumpur Photography Festival KLPF page. So please tune in and follow us every day for more exciting programs. And also our Facebook, we have our virtual gallery with all our exhibitions on there. Okay, please visit our website www.klpf.com.my. So that's where you will find our exhibitions. Now, our festival has been here for the 24th year now. And thanks so much to our sponsors who have help us made it possible to bring this program to all of you, our audience. So let us take a few moments to thank our sponsors. Welcome back to our studio at Angkasa Maluri. Now, before we proceed, let's take a little message from our main sponsor, Oppo.
3D borderless sense screen, 90 Hz refresh rate, AI color portrait, 960 FPS AI slow motion, night flare portrait, 65-watt Superbook 2.0, fully charged in 36 minutes. Oppo Reno 4 Pro, clearly the best you.
Thank you for staying with us. And ladies and gentlemen, do you know this 24th year program, all this while, has been organized by PCP Publications, the publisher of Revolution Magazine, Travel Mate Magazine, and Photo Creator Magazine, the only Chinese photography magazine in Southeast Asia. Okay, here you are. You see, this is our studio in Angkasa Maluri. I'm alone tonight. No, I'm not. Okay, it's a Sunday night today. Tonight we're going to have a Sunday night live with Gary Friedman. Let us see. Yeah, tonight our special guest is Gary Friedman, and I would like to invite him to the studio now. Gary!
Hey, Jessica, how are you today?
Good morning. Thank
Good
you
morning.
so much for waking up so early, and it is like 6:30 a.m. now.
6:30 in the morning in California. So hello from California, where it's like 110 degrees Fahrenheit outside. We're having a heat wave. Anyway.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. Well, where should we start? Today I'm going to talk about a religious debate, and we're going to settle things once and for all. I want to talk about the RAW versus JPEG religious debate. And many of you have heard of this. Many of you think you already know what the answer is. But the fact is, if you ever go online, you'll find that people have debates about everything. And I'm here to set the record straight. It is not a religious debate at all. We're going to talk about the difference between RAW versus JPEG. We're going to talk about the benefits of shooting RAW, of which there are plenty. We're going to talk about the surprising benefits of shooting JPEG, which nobody will ever mention when they're talking online. And can you see the difference in real life? Now, if I were giving this talk live, usually what I do is I hang a couple of posters on the wall. Let me see if I can bring them up right over here. You can hang posters on the wall. One of them which looks like this. It's a picture of a cat. It's very, very sharp. It's very well lit, and it has what's called a high frequency component to it. It's got black, white right next to each other. If there was ever a shot where you'd be able to see JPEG compression artifacts, this is it. And I'd hang two of these photographs, two posters, one on top of the other, and I'll tell people, can you tell the difference between the RAW and the JPEG? Most people can't, which is really strange because we were all taught since birth that shooting RAW is the best way to go, and shooting JPEG, oh, that's not for commercial use. Oh, that's not good for anything. So I'm going to examine that a little bit. Before I begin, I want to go over my credentials a tad bit. I am a stock photographer. I run the website friedmanarchives.com, and I license my images to book and magazine editors around the world. In addition to that, I have also written a handful of books on mirrorless cameras. I'm most famous for the Sony books. Sony cameras are now so complex it requires a book of about 750 pages just for the A7R4. My books are well known for being the best and most comprehensive and the easiest to understand. But I'm not going to turn this into a commercial or anything. But you can also get these books on my website, friedmanarchives.com/ebooks. You can see the website down there. So let me start by showing you this. This is, believe it or not, a JPEG. Now, if you're viewing this on a small screen, it'll be kind of difficult to see what's going on. So let me show you an extreme close-up of the teeth over there. Oh my God! Look at all those JPEG compression artifacts, especially in the area around the teeth or any place where there's a highlight. Yuck! I'm never going to shoot a JPEG again, ever! And that's how JPEGs got their bad reputation, because look at that. And that was straight out of the camera. Now this is also a JPEG. Now if you can't see the right image closely enough, I'll give you a zoom in on that one also. Wow, look at that. There's no JPEG compression artifacts there either. Well, they can't both be JPEGs. I was always taught since birth that JPEGs were inferior. And in fact, that's the kind of questions I start to bring up whenever I give this talk. I've always heard that JPEGs were inferior. How can all the experts on my favorite internet discussion forum be wrong? You've already spoken for 3 minutes, and already your credibility as a photographer is being called into question. How dare I say such heretical things? But I'm here to prove to you. You don't have to take my word for anything. I'm going to show you evidence. Let me start with the parts that everybody already knows. RAW files are the path to the very best image quality that you can get with your camera. There's no JPEG compression artifacts like we saw here. None of that, ever. Even in the early digital cameras. The joy of shooting RAW files is you have to post-process them yourself. Whereas if you shoot a JPEG, you'll be able to, the camera will do it for you. Ideal for big enlargements, professional submissions, because once upon a time you could either submit things in TIFF or in RAW, but RAW was not a universally recognized format. RAW has greater dynamic range than a JPEG does. I always shoot RAW plus JPEG to give myself a safety net, and it comes in handy for situations like this, because a JPEG will have this much dynamic range. Hey Jessica, can you turn off can you mute your microphone a bit? I can hear your
All right.
stapler.
Yeah.
Thanks. Your JPEG may have this much dynamic range, but a RAW will have this much dynamic range. And whenever you see anybody giving you a demonstration about how great RAW is, they're only going to show you examples where the dynamic range of your subject happens to fit within what a RAW file can capture. If your dynamic range is this, even a RAW file is not going to save you. This is such an example. The dynamic range in the scene was too great for the JPEG. As you can see, the sky has blown out, but just enough to fit within the RAW. Sometimes if you blow out your sky with JPEGs, that's it. When you blow it out, the information is lost and you can never recover it. But because the RAW files have a slightly wider dynamic range, you can sometimes recover those blown out highlights. And this is a good example of that. And there's many other examples as well, where if your light is not as good as you'd like, you can sometimes save it by shooting RAW and post-processing later. Here's an extreme example. And I use this because sometimes people online can get rather arrogant about this RAW versus JPEG thing. I was taking a picture of a couple by a Christmas tree, and I talked 30 shots maybe, but one of the shots, the flash didn't go off. So rather than delete that frame because it was black, I decided, can I post-process that black frame and recover the detail that was so horribly underexposed? So I did it first. I started with the JPEG because I always shoot RAW plus JPEG, right? So that's a JPEG black file and that's a RAW black file. I post-processed it and I brought back as much detail as I could with the JPEG, and then starting with the RAW file, I was able to get this. And anybody online who is one of those RAW versus JPEG zealots will say, well, see, look at this. You should never be shooting anything other than RAW. See, it's superior, which is true. But my answer to that is, if you're such a hot shot photographer, why are you underexposing all your images by 4 stops? Yeah. Anyway, yes, you can recover it, but there's still no substitute for good light and proper exposure. You couldn't license that lower image, even though you were able to recover more detail from it. Another example where I had seen northern lights for the very first time, I was up in Manitoba, Canada. Now, it's almost impossible to have the northern lights look on film or on digital the same way it looks to your eye. To your eye, it looks kind of whitish, a little off-white, like a white LED. And regardless of whether you're shooting film or digital, they always turn out kind of green. So I didn't know what kind of white balance to use. And I don't like to figure these things out in the field anyway. So I shot RAW plus JPEG. If you shoot RAW, you can figure out your white balance later on in the post-processing part. So here's how the JPEG came out. And I tried to post-process that in Photoshop to see, can I make the Aurora Borealis look the way it looked to my eye? This was as far as I was able to get it to go. When I processed the RAW file, I was able to do much more grandiose manipulation. Neither one of these look exactly the way it looked to my eye, but the RAW file got a whole lot closer than I was able to get with the JPEG. So the reason for that is RAW files sometimes have 12 bits per channel. Sometimes they have 16 bits per channel. But JPEGs only have 8 bits per channel. So if you're ever doing any kind of manipulation, you'll come into this problem where you have the bleeding of colors. And that happens because you got quantization of the colors. Whereas if you shoot RAW, you can do more demanding manipulation and not have such a great color shift. And I have a few more examples of that. Here we were shooting icebergs on a very badly lit day. And as you'll be seeing later on, I always tell people, just like there's no substitute for proper focusing, there's no substitute for good light. You either have good light or you don't. And if you don't have good light, shooting RAW and post-processing is not going to save you. So here's what I tried to do. I took bad light and I tried to post-process it a bit. Now this was just from the JPEG. Now if you look at the sky right above here, I'll give you a close-up of it. You can see some kind of splotchiness. That splotchiness is a direct result of this effect here, where you can't get a nice tonality if you're doing extreme manipulation on your image. So that's another good reason to shoot RAW. You don't suffer from that if you use RAW. A lot of examples like that. Here's one of my favorite examples. I was a photographer in the Soviet Union back in 1988. I was there to document a cultural exchange between Soviet and American high school students. Of course, this was back when there was a Soviet Union, back when they had statues of Lenin all over the country. And I was very arrogant back then. I said to myself, I'm not going to take a picture of Lenin. That's what tourists do. And I'm not a tourist. I'm a professional photographer. So I didn't do it. 20 years later, I regretted it. And I went back to my slides and I realized that one day I begrudgingly took a shot just to cover my bases. But as you can see, I was shooting slides, all right? And it was an overcast sky, which of course threw off the exposure meter and made everything look underexposed because the camera tries to make everything look 18% gray. And I said to myself, well, can I use modern technology to save this? So I scanned the slide and I did some manipulation and I brought out the detail, which is nice. But look at what happened here. I got a color shift. This also is one of the artifacts of extreme manipulation. So the way you solve that problem is you turn it into black and white later on, because everybody knows that history happened in black and white. So there's no question about it. So yeah, extreme manipulation, color shift, when you shoot raw, less of that happens. So let's deal into the technical stuff for just a moment. What happens when you shoot a raw file? Two things happen when you shoot a raw file. The first thing that happens is it pulls the bits from the sensor and then it writes it to the card. And that's it. Nothing else. What happens when you shoot a JPEG? A few more things happen at lightning speed. First, it pulls the bits from the sensor, just like with a RAW, and then it does things that a 1 hour photoplace will normally do. It will adjust the contrast, it will adjust the sharpness, it will adjust the white balance. It will compress the image, throwing away information that your eye and your brain cannot perceive. And then, after throwing that information away, it then writes it to the card. Now, that's a high-level overview. There's a greater amount of detail that I skipped over. Let's go into that. These are all the steps that happen every time your camera shoots a JPEG. Some of these I mentioned in the previous slide. You press the shutter release button. It reads data from the sensor, and then it does a process that I haven't discussed yet called demosaicing. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but this is very important. And some people don't like the camera doing that for them because there's different kinds of demosaicing algorithms. It'll then reduce the noise if it can. It will then do what the 1 hour photoplace does. It'll just adjust the contrast, adjust the color balance, adjust the sharpness. It compresses the image by throwing information that your eye and your brain cannot perceive away. Then it writes it to the card, and then, and this is important now, it throws the original information away after it writes it to the card. Some people don't like this. They view it as the same thing as having your negatives developed at a 1 hour photoplace, and you keep your prints and you throw the negatives away. What if the guy at the 1 hour photoplace didn't print it right? I've seen examples where you have a nice horizon and the 1 hour photoplace exposed for the horizon, but in fact, the rainbow was completely blown out. The information was in the negative, but they processed it wrong. People don't like to have your negatives thrown away. So that's what the equivalent is whenever you're shooting a JPEG. It writes the information in the card and then it throws the original data away. When you shoot a RAW file, only 3 of those boxes happen. You press the shutter release button, it pulls the data from the card, it writes the data to the card. All of it. You are responsible for doing all these gray boxes that the camera skipped. This can take an awful lot of time. And in the early days, I did not like to shoot RAW because it took so much more time. The camera can do all these gray boxes instantly. In fact, so much faster that if you're shooting sports, you can shoot a faster shot-to-shot time with JPEG than you can with RAW, because the JPEG processing is done in hardware. So, just the green boxes. I promised to talk about demosaicing. This is the process. Believe it or not, you don't actually have a color sensor in your camera. What you have is a bunch of black and white sensors. And on top of every single pixel, you have a color filter on top of it. This particular pixel has a blue filter on it. This one has a green filter on it. It's extremely difficult to manufacture a precision color array, but if they can make the sensor, why not the array? When you are demosaicing and you're trying to figure out, you need to have a red and a green and a blue component for every single pixel there. But you only have 1/3 of that information. This pixel has only the blue information. The camera has to infer what's the green component, what's the red component. Over here, you have only the green information. The camera has to figure out what's the blue information and what's the red for every single pixel. This process of figuring out the missing two colors is called demosaicing. And no two programs do it the same way, and you have vastly different results. For example, here is an example of 3 different programs demosaicing. Now, whenever you're looking for noise, you always want to look for the shadows because that's where the noise is going to be greatest. So here's a dramatically lit scene. I want to look at the noise in the darker eye. And I use 3 different programs for demosaicing the raw file. And look what a difference the 3 programs make. This is Sony's image data converter software, which they don't even support anymore. This is a free piece of software called Raw Therapy. And the one on the right is Lightroom. Now, a lot of people would look at this and say, wow, Lightroom is so much sharper. Or you might look at Sony's IDC and say, wow, IDC is so much smoother. It's like almost noise-free. Noise and detail are trade-offs. So if you want to have the noise completely gone away, they just kind of smooth it over. And that's what's happening over here. All the detail is smoothed over. It's smooth, it's noise-free, but your detail, you can't count the number of eyelashes anymore. Raw Therapy takes the other approach. It tries to keep as much detail as possible. And when you do that, more noise results. Lightroom has a nice balance. I have another example here where this is zooming in on the upper left-hand corner of a raw file. This was taken at high ISO, late in the evening. Adobe Camera Raw was able, this is the best it could do in terms of getting rid of noise. And DxO, in this particular example, did a cleaner job. Now, just because DxO did it better here doesn't mean it's going to do it better for every single image. Some images will work better under some programs, and some will do better than others. And I don't like to get bogged down in this detail at all. My preference is to have good light, because if you want people to say wow to your images, and that's really what your goal is with photography, you want to have really good and dramatic light. So if the light's not good, I don't really care to shoot. Let's talk about compression for just a moment. This is a Japanese flag. Let's make a TIFF file. You remember TIFF files, right? They're really, really big. Here's the reason they're really, really big. If you want to have a TIFF file from a Japanese flag, you start with the upper left-hand corner right over there. And you say to yourself, what are the red, green, and blue components of that pixel? Well, it's white. So the answer is 255, 255, 255. Pixel number 2, right over here, right next to it. That also is white. So your red, green, and blue values are 255, 255, 255. And you can see now, point 1. If you want to make yourself a TIFF file, this is how you do it. You just go from point to point to point, and you list the red, green, and blue values for each one. And there's your TIFF file. It's huge. It's huge and it's very inefficient. Now, I can take that information and compress it and represent the Japanese flag using much less information than what a TIFF file would do. How do you do that? Well, the Japanese flag is a white rectangle of these dimensions, and in the center, I put a big red circle of that radius in the center. Great. I just did image compression. If you know something about the image, you can be very, very clever. Now, of course, you can't do that in camera. You have much more sophisticated algorithms. And I also want to talk a little bit about different kinds of compression. There's lossy compression and there's lossless compression. So many of you are familiar with SIT files and zip files. Zip files, I think, have become the norm now. SIT files used to be the domain of Macintoshes. But the idea is whenever you want to send a lot of information and you want to send it over a 1200 baud modem, you squeeze it, you zip it up, you throw away information to make the file smaller, you send it over the modem, and then you decompress it on the other side. What's important about zip files is that when you decompress it on the other side, it must be bit for bit identical to what the original was. If it's off by even 1 bit, the computer program won't run properly. It'll crash. There's another kind of compression called lossy compression, where you make it even smaller. And when you decompress it on the other side, it's not bit for bit identical. It's very close, but not exactly the same. Why would you ever want that? The reason lossy compression is valuable is in case you're sending information that's not being computed upon. For example, if you're compressing an audio file, your ear cannot tell if it's not bit for bit identical to the original. That's why MP3 files are so popular. Sometimes when you compress a visual image, your eye cannot perceive the things that are different. So as long as you're not sending computer executables, lossy files are much preferable because you can actually squeeze the file to make it much smaller than you normally would be able to do. An example of that is here. If you have a 24 megapixel RAW file, uncompressed, straight out of the camera, it's almost 40 megabytes in size. If you zip it, you might be able to get it a little bit smaller, almost 30 megabytes in size. But a fine, which is JPEG, which is lossy compression, you can get that size down to like 1/4 of the original. And this is the reason why JPEGs were so popular in the early days, because memory cards were expensive. Memory cards were not very dense. You might have a 16 megabyte memory card in your camera. And the engineers in Japan said, people want to have their vacation pictures on this camera. We need to be able to have as many vacation pictures squeezed onto this memory card as possible. So let's make that JPEG file as small as possible. This resulted in a disaster. I'm going to skip this one because instead of the Japanese flag example where you're being clever, they're being clever in other ways. Something like cosine transforms, wavelength compression, and other mathematical things which are very clever, but it's way beyond the scope of this talk. But the idea is you're taking information that the eye and the brain cannot perceive, and you're throwing it away. And most people cannot see the difference. Now, when I say most people, I'm not talking about this example here. This is an example. If you want to see examples like this of JPEG compression artifacts with a modern camera, you have to do this on purpose. Here's how I got the shot on the right. I took the shot on the left, which has no JPEG compression artifacts that you can see. And in Photoshop, I did an open, modify, save, close. Open, modify, save, close. Every time you do an open, modify, save, and close, it gets squeezed a little bit more. I did this 200 times. And that's how you got the buildup of JPEG compression artifacts, just so I can show you what JPEG compression artifacts look like. A modern camera will not do this anymore. I had to do it on purpose. Let me give you another extreme example. This was done with some very old software. One thing I didn't mention so far is that whenever you're making a JPEG, the amount that the JPEG gets squeezed is not defined. In fact, when the folks making the JPEG standard decided, here's how it's going to work, they had an array of photographer experts, they had clinical psychologists, they had computational physicists, they had all experts from all different areas to design the JPEG standard. It was called the Joint Photographic Experts Group, JPEG. And they took all this information. They knew how about the computational side, they knew about the photography side, they knew about the human perception side, and they designed the standard, which most people wouldn't be able to tell if it was compressed, but they didn't specify how much to compress it. That is left up to the user. And that is why every time you save something as a JPEG in Photoshop, it asks you, do you want a quality of 12 or do you want a quality of 1? A quality of 1 is the smallest file size, and you may or may not be able to see JPEG compression artifacts. And hard disk size is so plentiful nowadays that everybody always chooses 12. But that's the reason it asks you, because they want the user making these choices. Here's a piece of software that was done in the early days. It let the user not choose the compression level, not from 1 to 12, but from 1 to 100. And 1 was the best quality ever. Now, this is a really old example. This is a 3 megabyte camera, 3 megapixel camera. And with the highest quality compression, here's a close-up of a mountain ridge. Not bad. When you have a compression level of 51 out of 100, it went from 3.2 megabytes to 218 kilobytes. That's a huge savings in space. And it's really hard to tell the difference between the first two images. So that's an example right there of the power of JPEG compression. You cut it into less than a tenth of the size, and it still looks pretty good. Now, you can go to extremes. Here's compression level of 80 out of 100, 178 kilobytes. And now you're starting to see JPEG compression artifacts block in here and here. And if you get to a ridiculous amount, you get nothing but compression artifacts. And that's why no piece of software written on this earth anymore will let you compress it that much. Fortunately, I hung on to the software to give you an example. And so that's what the compression, that's why early cameras had compression artifacts in their JPEGs, because they tried to squeeze them as much as possible. And they didn't really care as much about quality. They cared about happy tourists. Modern cell phones will still give you JPEG compression artifacts without you having to do the open, modify, save, close that I did in Photoshop. If you look over here, anywhere you have a high frequency, which is white next to black, next to white, next to black, that's called high frequency area. That's where your JPEG compression artifacts are going to start to show. And you can see them around letters here. The reason why cell phones will do it is because the carriers don't want to pay for all of that extra quality. The carriers want that image to be compressed as much as possible to save them money. So there's a big difference between a smartphone and a regular camera right there. So going back to the very beginning of this, can you tell the difference anymore? In the early days, there was a great incentive to compress the JPEGs beyond recognition. That incentive is gone now. When I took this picture, I shot with RAW plus JPEG, where your camera shoots one picture, but it stores two different files. I almost never go to the RAW file anymore because the JPEGs are so good. And this test was designed to show off JPEG compression artifacts. If the JPEG was going to be inferior, this image would show it. And I always put posters on the wall and let people have a look, and nobody can ever tell. Disproving the theory that JPEGs were inferior to RAW. As long as your light is good, and as long as your exposure is right for that light, JPEGs are going to look great. And look at how much time it'll save you in front of your computer with Photoshop. So there's another example. This is the one I showed you at the beginning. No JPEG compression artifacts whatsoever. JPEGs are way better now than they were back in the olden days. So there's a couple important things you need to know about shooting RAW. And you're not going to hear this on the internet discussion forums. The first one is, if your light is good and your exposure is right for that light, your images may not benefit greatly from shooting RAW. The great benefit to shooting RAW is if your exposure is way off. Then you can do extreme manipulations and recover details in the shadows and do all those things I showed you earlier in the talk. But if your light's right and your exposure nails it, no great benefit. And I want to use this opportunity to hammer this idea into your head. Good light is more important than shooting RAW and post-processing. And if you want an example proving that, I have one here. Now this picture should make people say, wow. After all, it was taken with a full-frame 24 megapixel camera with a Zeiss Prime. Ooh, the best equipment you could get at the time. Now, no one's going to look at that and say, wow. Or no one's going to look at that picture up close and say, wow, that lens you have looks like it can resolve 50 line pairs per millimeter. Wow, I'm impressed. No one's ever going to say that. They're going to look at that and say, wow, because of the light. It's not the resolution of the lens, it's not the number of megapixels you have. And there's no way, just because you shot RAW, there's no way you can go from this to this. It's the light. It's the light. You get the idea. So far, I've spoken about things that people already know. That RAW is superior, although if your light's good and your exposure is right for that light, not much of a benefit. There are benefits to shooting JPEG. that nobody talks about, but I will. I'm going to talk about the faster shot-to-shot time, because even though the camera is doing more, it's doing all the things, all those little squares that a 1 hour photo place will do, the camera does it for you. And because all that processing is done in hardware, it's much, much faster. If you're shooting sports, faster shot-to-shot time, and you can actually fill your buffer with more images because the JPEGs are smaller. If a lot of today's bells and whistles are JPEG only, that's by definition, because the minute you start to take an image and play with it, it's not raw anymore. That's where the term raw came from. My favorite JPEG things, the panorama mode, which is a guilty pleasure for me, but I use it just like everybody else. In-camera HDR and the multi-frame noise reduction. I'm going to show you an example of the last one in just a minute. So those are bells and whistles you can't get with RAW. In many camera corrections, it can be done faster by the camera. Lens corrections and DRO. What's DRO, I heard you say? I'm going to show you an example of that in just a moment. If you're shooting a wedding, how many times have you seen, have you been to a wedding where the photographer shoots during the day and they have a slideshow for you at night? Well, that happens because they were shooting JPEG and RAW, and you can't go through and color your images and put together a slideshow using RAW. It just takes forever. Have you ever tried to shoot 500 RAW images and open them up in Lightroom just to have a look at the thumbnails? It takes hours. So if you shoot JPEG, you can throw that together really quickly. A lot of lenses nowadays have built-in distortion, and many people don't realize it, because when you shoot with the JPEG, the camera knows about the distortion in the lens and it can correct for it invisibly to you. That doesn't happen with a RAW file. You got to correct for it later on, or unless you have a lens that Lightroom knows about and you have the automatic distortion correction turned on. But if it has distortion, if it has dark corners, if it has chromatic aberrations, it can all be fixed in camera. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration here. Let's see here. Can you see this? Oh, come on. This is my Alpha 99 II. It works really well, and I had this configured so I'll be able to show you in real time. Okay, it's not working now. But basically, I was going to show you what the other one did. I had a distortion-prone lens mounted to that camera, and I was going to show you in real time how it can correct for the distortion and brighten the dark corners. But this is a live event, and things just go wrong, so that's the way things go. But this is an example of what I was going to show you. Here you can see pincushion distortion, and when you shoot the JPEG, it goes away. If you shoot RAW, you got to fix that yourself. Now, these kind of artifacts only show up whenever you're shooting a grid. Not everybody shoots a brick wall. You may not notice it, but if you shoot JPEG, it gets fixed for you. This is my other favorite application for shooting JPEGs only. If you happen to forget your tripod, there is a feature on many cameras called multi-frame noise reduction. It goes by different names with different manufacturers. This is Sony's name. But the way it works is it will take 3 or 4 different images, and it's handheld, so it'll also align all of those different images inside the camera, and then it will average the images together. What you're doing is you're averaging away the random noise, and then what remains is the reinforced subject. So you can make noise go away using multi-frame noise reduction without needing a tripod, without needing a long exposure. Can't do that with RAW. Just saying, there are some bells and whistles that make it worthwhile. And do you really want to spend more time in front of your computer? I know I spend way too much time in front of my computer as it is. So if you shoot JPEG, if your light's good, if your exposure is right for that light, you can enjoy your life more and still have people say, wow. So just to summarize, the left column is things you already know. RAW files can produce the best that your camera can make. Shots must be tweaked by hand using your computer, so you can no longer live. You're wasting the gift of consciousness by spending more time on your computer. It's not a universally recognized file format. If you want to take your RAW file and upload it to your 1-hour photo place or upload it to an image printing bureau, they won't always look at a RAW file. Plus, even from the same manufacturer, sometimes RAW file specification will change. So if you have the newest camera, last year's Photoshop won't be able to open the raw file. So JPEGs are a universal standard, raw files are not. JPEG compression artifacts, you don't get them with raw. You can decide on white balance and other things later on. That's another nice thing. Remember the pictures of the Northern Lights I showed you? I didn't know what white balance to use. If you shoot it with raw, you can figure it out at the time you open it up. You can specify your white balance then. And of course, my biggest pet peeve is you can spend more time post-processing. Now, this is not quite as true as it once was. Today with Lightroom, it's the raw demosaicing part is almost invisible to you. The amount of processing you need to do is about the same. If you're shooting JPEG, it takes up much less space on your memory card, which isn't a big issue anymore because you can get 250 terabyte on a card. I'm joking, but the density is getting greater. Faster shot-to-shot time because the images are smaller. And it handles the contrast color balance for you. And it can be read by any program. It's a universal standard. So now people ask me about, well, what about this? What about the old one? And I think you know the answer by now. This image on the left here was taken from an early digital camera about 20 years ago. Back then, the engineers had a great incentive to make the JPEGs as small as possible because the density of the memory cards was low, and they wanted to have people store as many tourist shots on the card as possible. And they don't do that anymore. So this is a modern JPEG. And as you, sometimes when you shoot JPEG, you got 3 different quality levels, right? You got standard, you got fine, you got extra fine. This was a fine one, the middle one, the one where it's compressed more. No JPEG compression artifacts. I just said that. So which one was raw? The answer is I don't remember. Oh yeah, there we go. Second shot was raw, but there's no way you can tell. If you can't tell, it doesn't matter. And I mentioned that. So in conclusion, I want to mention that JPEGs have come a long way from the last 20 years. And the bias, the anti-JPEG bias that the world once had is no longer valid. You can't see JPEG compression artifacts out of the camera anymore. And I'm going to hammer this into your mind again. If your light is good and your exposure is right for that light, there is no great benefit to shooting raw anymore. So hopefully I've changed your mind a bit about this religious issue. All the folks who are talking about how great raw is, they're right. But if you know what you're doing, you can get away with just shooting JPEG all the time. I know a lot of photojournalists who only shoot JPEG because they can't be bothered with raw processing. You have to know what you're doing to be able to get away with that. So I want to wrap up this talk. We're a bit early, so we have time for questions. That's good. I want to wrap up this talk by talking about 2 different things. One is I'd like you to buy my books because these are the most comprehensive books on the Sony, the Fujifilm, and the Olympus mirrorless cameras. These are just a sample. We got 50 titles going to friedmanarchives.com/ebooks. And I also want to talk to you about something I've been doing for the last 10 years. My wife and I have been traveling around the world giving 2-day photography seminars in major cities. And this assumes you have no knowledge of photography whatsoever. And yet, people who have been shooting pictures for 30 years have attended. And so they said to me, you know, I've been shooting for 30 years and I still learned a lot of things. Ideas that were really fuzzy became crystal clear. Gary, you're a great teacher. You can communicate complex things in a way that's easy to understand. And that's the idea behind the Friedman Archives seminars. Photography can become so intimidating, especially if you're a beginner. Someone's got to be able to explain these things properly. So I take a ground-up approach and I build up from the basics. Basics that nobody's talking about anymore. Basics that the Kodachrome shooters used to know. Did you know that once upon a time, there was no such thing as Photoshop? And that photographers, if they wanted to make a living, they shot slides because the idea of processing negatives is ridiculous. Those folks could make a living. They can get pictures that made people say, wow, without using Photoshop and without shooting negatives and doing any kind of post manipulation. Those techniques that worked in the 1960s still apply to digital cameras today. That's what I teach. And we talk about a very intuitive approach to what the photographers in the 60s used to do. And it's also a really great way to jumpstart your creativity, which people always taught me cannot be taught. Well, it can be, and I've done it. Day one is the creative day. You keep your camera on auto. and you can learn how to use light and composition the way the pros used to do in the old days. I'm not going to go over this bullet by bullet, but you got the idea. Day number 2, as we slowly go into the technical stuff, only when you need to. The technical stuff won't save you if you don't have your light and composition right. Okay, it's only will help you make it maybe 5% better if you know what you're doing. If you got day 1 done. So we talk about meter modes. We talk about JPEG versus RAW. We talk about f-stop, shutter speeds, all the things that people want to know. And then we talk about this, histograms. I explain histograms in a really intuitive way. In fact, after you've done taking this, you'll be so confident in your knowledge of histograms, you can bully other people online. That's how well you'll know it. We're going to talk about resolution and only 8 things I do in Photoshop. I am not a Photoshop expert. If your light is good, you got the idea. If you pre-visualize your shot, you don't need Photoshop a lot. And just for you, just because you're attending, I have a streaming version of the seminar because we can't travel anywhere right now. So we took cameras the 2 full days, and we've edited it down to about 6 hours worth. And it's broken down into chunks, and there's ways of reinforcing those chunks. So it goes from short-term memory to long-term memory. And this is available to you now for this coming week for 10% off. Go to friedmanarchives.com/seminars. You can stream from the comfort of your home anywhere in the world and use discount code KLPF 2020, and you can get 10% off this coming week. I hope you all benefit from that. One last pitch before I go open things up for questions. In addition to the books, of which are great, I also am associate editor of Cameracraft magazine in the UK. This is better quality than National Geographic in terms of printing. And unlike most popular photo magazines, who really serve the interests of the advertisers, here I talk with photographers who are doing really interesting things with the camera and doing important things. And there's some technical discussion, but it's also, here's what's important in photography. Here's how people are using their cameras. It's to inspire you to be a little bit more creative with the tools you already have. This is a labor of love. We've been doing this for 8 years. You can go to, again, the bottom of the screen here, friedmanarchives.com/cameracraft and subscribe. I have 1 or 2 articles every month. It's probably the most interesting writing I've ever done. And I also encourage you to send me an email. And when you do that, you'll be on my blog mailing list. The blog is really, really interesting. I'm going to put my, can I comment on it here? I'm looking at the comments section, and I don't see the ability for me to comment, but I'm gonna give it to you right now. Hold on. Let's see here. I see it, but I don't see a place for me to.
I want to show you the comment.
I can't type it. It looks like.
I show you the comments. So, yeah, we have this on.
Yes.
Gary, do you mind to come up?
Sorry about that.
You are hidden.
Can you see me now? Okay. My email address is gary@friedmanarchives.com. I was actually going to type it in. I was going to make a PowerPoint slide, but do that. Send me an email. I'll put you on my blog mailing list. It comes out once a month. Interesting topics. It's not. I try to make it very generic so it applies for any camera that you have. Next month, I'm going to be talking about the ways I did some jewelry shots yesterday, because photographing shiny objects is a very difficult thing. I'm working on a new adapter. Anything, whatever I'm working on, there's always a teachable moment there. Anyway, that's pretty much my talk. We have time left over for some questions if you have any. I'm here for you. Great.
Yeah, we have some time. So Gary, today, why are you wearing red?
Because I'm Santa Claus today. Today I'm Santa Claus.
So that's why you're giving a 10%
discount
to our audience.
Just because making fun of my quarantine beard. Oh, I haven't left the house for 3 months. 4. Actually, it's 4. It's September now, isn't it? Yeah, it's been a while. So I'm going to see, my grandkids want me to be Dumbledore for Halloween. I'm on my way.
So compared to the poster.
Oh, the poster, a lot longer now. The poster was a long time ago. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You should see what I look like now. Wait a second. I've been doing other shots here. Let's see. Can you see me here? If there aren't any questions, I can waste time doing this stuff. I've been taking quarantine beard self portraits. This one's one of my favorites. There's a famous actor named Orson Welles, and he was a giant guy. So I tried to do Orson Welles lighting and Orson Welles clothing, and try to just kind of have his. I was trying to do my Orson Welles impersonation. Fidel Castro. Now, by the way, I don't actually smoke a cigar, so I had I made a cigar as a prop, and I photoshopped in the smoke afterward. But the lighting is good, and it really shows off the beard nicely. Um, here I am being a rabbi, and for those of you who don't know, the word kvetch is a Yiddish word meaning complain a lot. So born to complain. That's what Jews are known for. Here I am being Santa Claus during the summertime. And here I am being Amish. The Amish hate technology, but they love to farm. That's what their life is around. And this is just me looking like somebody else. So anyway, that's a small diversion there. But the beard's getting longer and longer. Does anybody have any questions? I can attack.
Gary, oh, yeah, there are some comments. There are no questions, okay, but just some comments. I think, yeah, Ong Chin On, he agrees with you, right? JPEG is faster.
JPEG is definitely faster. Yes.
Right? Because of definitely
and you don't
faster.
have to.
And now we have Marcus here. He says he still prefer RAW when it comes to job, meaning that he's a professional photographer. He does job for his clients.
Yes.
So
let me reinforce that idea. I also shoot RAW. I shoot JPEG and RAW exclusively because RAW can be a safety net. You never really know how it's going to be used. You never really know if there might be an exposure error. So I shoot the JPEG and RAW. When I get home, I'll take the RAW and move it into a separate directory, and I almost never will touch it because my JPEGs are usually good enough. It's there just in case I need it. If you're working a job, oh yeah, shoot RAW, because that's the right thing to do. Even though JPEGs, even though you may not need it, it's a good thing to do, and it's that safety net. So yeah, I agree with Marcus.
Yeah, exactly, Gary. I also do that. When there are some shots which I think I might need it later,
right?
So I shoot the RAW and JPEG. The JPEG is faster for me to process for magazines and something, right? But RAW, I keep it just in case that, oh, I need to do an exhibition.
Right, I need to
comes
enlarge
to the
it.
Rescue.
Very big. Now it turns out JPEGs can be enlarged to great dimension also. People don't realize that. And I don't know if you remember, Jessica, but there was a time when if you were in the magazine publishing area, when someone submitted an image to you, it had to be in TIFF format. Magazines would not accept JPEG submissions because of the universal truth that JPEGs are inferior. And to this
Those were the years.
Those were the years. And it was true back then, but it isn't anymore. But yeah.
Yeah, it was so back then. Was it something like 20 years ago?
Yes. 20 years ago, we have 3 megapixel cameras. It's amazing how things have progressed since then.
And oh my God, the other comments are all about your beard. You got more. You have more fans all for your beard. Like David says, you have a perfect lighting for your beard.
Well, thank you.
And Marcus says, cigar is nice.
I'm glad people are I'm glad I can keep people interested with something. If it's not going to be my talk, it can at least be the beard. Thank you for noticing the lighting. I take the lighting seriously. And if this camera were working properly, I would show you right now, which I don't think it is. Let's see, demo cam. Oh, there it is. Okay. Nothing is more important to a photographer than light. So here's my setup. I got light. There's nothing more important. Light. This is where I can see what you see, and this is my my control screen over here. Anyway, yeah. Thank you for noticing the lighting. I appreciate that.
Mm.
Oh wait, oh wait,
And Gary,
wait. If I got this going, now I can show you that real time demonstration of. You probably know this already. So this is a lens that is known for its distortion. So I'm going to put this over here, and you can kind of see the distortion in the corners, the pincushion distortion. If I hit the depth of field preview button right now, you can see it start to straighten out. This is one of those things where not only would it stop the lens down so you can see the depth of field, but it would also show you how it was going to correct things later on. If the lens vignettes in the corner have dark corners, this will fix it. If it has chromatic aberration. Yeah. So you can't do that with a mirror. You can't have a demonstration like this with the mirrorless bodies, which is why I'm using this wonderful Alpha 99 II, which is still one of my favorite cameras. I still use this exclusively in the studio because it handles so well. There's no love for the A mount anymore, but this camera is just wonderful. It's like fine wine. Anyway, so that was a demonstration I couldn't give you before.
Well, it's really fantastic. It's amazing that immediately it corrects the distortion.
Yes, but here's the funny thing. You may say, wow, that's so immediate. But when you're shooting a JPEG, it has to be that fast. Because if you're shooting at 10, 15 frames per second, the camera's got to be able to do that for every single frame. So yeah, the correction is done in hardware. And yes, it's amazing. And if you shoot RAW, you got to do that yourself, or hope that programs like Lightroom will know about the lens that you're using and put that in for you automatically. Okay. Well, there's no other questions.
Gary,
yes.
There's one more thing. Someone told me years ago that if you post-process your JPEG, how to say, will it cause the pixels to what do you call that? It was in Chinese, but it means that the more you process the JPEG, the worse it becomes.
That's true. In fact, I showed you an example of that earlier on. Remember, I showed you that picture of the cafe? Let me see if I can find it here. I had to do something 200 times in order for the JPEG compression artifacts to show. Where is it? Da, da, da. I will find it. It's here. Well, this is frustrating. Oh, there it is. Okay. So bring that one up. So this is the example I was talking about. You can get this effect on purpose. And the way I got it was to do in Photoshop, open, modify, save, close. And I did that 200 times. Every time you open it up, modify it, save it, it compresses it a little bit more. And then you close it, then it's all gone. And that is why. Now, in order to get something that this bad, you got to do it 200 times. If you just do it 3 or 4 times, you'll never notice a degradation. But the general philosophy is, if you're going to be editing your images, do it all in one session. That way, you only have to compress it once when you do the save upon exit. If you have to do more to it, you can do it 2 or 3 times, and then you won't see this part. But generally, go back to your original and start again. That's what conventional wisdom says. So your friend is correct. That the more you do the manipulation, the worse it gets. But it's not as true as it used to be. But still, because in theory it's not as good, I do everything in one sitting.
Yeah, so that that notion is still holds true.
It does.
Right? Don't.
In theory.
Yes, don't overdo the JPEG. But it's still.
And then,
it is still a good file.
Oh, I love it. By the way, we're not talking about Photoshop in this talk, but the general philosophy is also don't overdo anything in Photoshop. Otherwise, it looks Photoshopped. You want to be able to do a whole list of very subtle tweaks, so that way it doesn't look like you Photoshopped something. Because how many times have you seen a really beautiful image with a sky in the background, it's a sunset and a rainbow and a whale tail, and you say to yourself that had to have been photoshopped. And once somebody says that, you've lost. It's like you're no longer a good photographer. Now you're a good photoshopper. It's like you're trying to impress them the wrong way.
Oh, well, that's a good name, a photoshopper.
Yes, I just created a new word.
Right. Yeah. So it is still true. JPEG by itself is good. Is a good file. Just that
Yeah,
don't how to say, take it for granted and overdo it.
agreed. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier with the Northern Lights example, JPEGs are great if your light is good and your exposure is right for that light. If you need to do any kind of extreme manipulation, the raw files will hold up better. And that's why, again, I always shoot both just in case I need the raw, because you never know. And memory is so cheap now. How can you justify not doing that? But you just have to keep in mind, what's your life energy worth? How much time do you want to spend in front of your computer? Sometimes
Right.
the JPEGs look better than the raw files. I've had so many cases where there's another feature about the JPEGs which I didn't talk about because it only happens with the Sony cameras, but they have a feature where it selectively lightens the dark parts according to an algorithm that nobody can quite figure out. There was a National Geographic photographer who shot RAW plus JPEG, but he didn't do all of his own processing. He sent it to the boys, and he said, make sure the RAW files look as good as a JPEG. And after a half hour, the guys back at the post processing department said we can't do it. It took them a half hour to try to duplicate how good the JPEG was, and they weren't able to duplicate that. There have been times when the out of camera JPEG has less noise than what I was able to do manually by processing the raw file. And by the way, this is heretical, all right? Most of the time, if you want low noise shots, starting with the raw file has historically been the best way to go. There have been times when the JPEG looked better than when you open it up in Lightroom. And Lightroom is supposed to know what your contrast setting was, what your white balance setting was, what your sharpness setting was, and then it's supposed to dial those sliders in for you. So it should look as good as a JPEG out of the camera, but it never does. There have been times when the JPEG looked better if I didn't touch it.
Gary, looks like you are answering this question. David asks, does the Lightroom affect the JPEG image quality? I think you just answered it.
I think
right?
I just answered that. Yes, it tries to make it.
All right. You're really Santa Claus. You send the answer before the questions arrive.
I'm a clairvoyant Santa Claus. By the way, I should point out here, because you keep talking about Santa Claus. Let me turn this off here. Where's camera one? I'm actually shooting in front of a green screen, and because of that, and because I'm wearing a red shirt, I look more like Santa Claus because I got Christmas colors going on now.
Oh, really?
Okay, I'm giving away my secrets. And I also should, since I'm talking about this also, I should also point out that I can do other things with the green screen.
You're so entertaining.
I try to be, especially during dead times like this. And you recognize this. You recognize the Simpsons couch. Okay, enough of this. Enough of this. This cartoon, believe it or not, has broken records. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the longest running animated show in the world. And I give classes online to elementary school kids, and so many of them have not heard of the Simpsons. It's just like it's off the radar. It's amazing.
It's a lost generation.
It is. Before the Simpsons, it was the Haier Brothers was the longest running animated show. That was in China. It ran for like 30 years, I think.
Okay, there's someone who likes Simpsons just as
the
good
Simpsons
as
are the
you.
best. I see it. Well, I haven't watched that for 20 years.
I have one question here which I don't seem to.
What about photography
decipher.
using conventional film? What about photography using conventional film? How relatively will the images be in comparison to digital? Well, I can speak to that because, hold on. Hold on. Let me get this. Let me get this. I wish I had a camera person that could follow me around. I have a few film cameras.
There you
This one here,
are.
the Dynax 9. This is the Minolta XK. This was their knockoff of a Nikon F2AS. A knockoff meaning they copied all of the design mistakes that Nikon made. And anyway, the pentaprism is removable, and it's just like a Nikon, except that they did Nikon one better. It could have automatic exposure. So you set the f-stop, it'll set the shutter speed. Whereas with the Nikon, you had to do the match needle inside the viewfinder. It was great. Anyway, the question was, how does digital stack up with film? And the answer, you're going to get a lot of answers depending on who you talk to. My personal opinion is there is nothing better about film anymore. When digital first came out, film was superior because it had higher resolution and had greater stability. All those problems have gone away now. Film has higher resolution, it has a better dynamic range. It doesn't, I mean, digital has a higher resolution, greater than dynamic range. A lot of hipsters love film because it's old and because it's cool, not because it's better. And who the heck wants to carry these things around with them anymore? This has a motor permanently built in. It can go a blistering 3.5 frames per second. Ooh. Anyway, now again, if you talk to some other gurus, they're going to say, "Oh, film is much better." There is an art photographer named Peter Lick. He sells in museums giant enlargements, taking on a 4x5 color negative film. And whenever people go into the gallery and you hear people selling his images, well, these were taken with medium format film, and people go, film, wow! And his enlargements can go for $100,000, $500,000. He's sold some for $1 million. So there is a perception of film being only the high guru priests, masters can do film, whereas the rest of us have cell phones. However, that's a perception. Technically, there is nothing better about film, my opinion. Did I over-answer that question?
Has advanced.
Yes. This one, by the way, can go 5.5 frames per second. Okay.
And what is more appropriate to hear from you, Gary? You are a techie guru.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, I can show you my Hewlett Packard 41 calculator, which I use to let's see here.
More of your treasures coming. Let's wait for Gary.
Okay, well, you were only going to go home anyway after this talk, right? When I was in college, I had a HP 41 calculator.
And it's one of your design, right?
Actually, this is a speech synthesizer. This was done in the 1980s. If anybody ever heard the physicist Stephen Hawking, the guy who was in a wheelchair,
right.
He had a speech synthesizer. This was the one he used. This sounds like the Stephen Hawking voice. And I was able to hook up my calculator to this and make my calculator talk. Okay. We have time, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Don't worry, I'm not going home.
Okay. I hope nobody else does. I'm not worried about them. Let me go to another talk. Give me a minute to find it, because this might be of interest, because I had an awful lot of inventions that were photograph related. Documents from out school talks. Here we go. Here we go. This will take a second. There we go. I give a talk. I gave this talk in Copenhagen about my decade at NASA and the inventions that got me there. And over in the lower left-hand corner, that's me, believe it or not, before I grew the beard, back when I had hair, and I made the Guinness Book of World Records for having built the world's smallest telephone. It was so small.
Let everybody see Gary Friedman when he was 20.
Yeah, about 20, when I was young and good looking. Not like now. But it was in the Nike running shoes were very, very skinny. So this made the Guinness Book of World Records. And every time I go to talk to a high school, whenever I talk about career day or what it's like to be an engineer, I open with that, and suddenly I have instant credibility. Wow, he is in the Guinness Book of World Records. Um, so I'm going to skip over all of this stuff because this is about me and telephones and answering machines that I built and a time machine and all this other stuff. I'm going to skip over all that. The other shoe, by the way, had tools in it, so you can plug it into the wall. Because this is before cell phones and this is before cordless phones, so you had to be able to plug it in the wall. I always had with me all the tools that telephone repair people used to have on their belt. I always had it with me, and you can run on it. Once the circuitry was finished, I poured it like an epoxy compound, so it was hard as a rock. I can hear you laugh. Here's the Guinness Book entry. This isn't what I wanted to talk to you about, though. This is stuff I built for a law firm. The Hewlett Packard calculator was the first prize in electronic design competition at UCLA, and I was able to hook up the calculator to other things, like this circuitry over here. One of the first things I did with it was I used it for time exposures. I was able to hook it up to my camera. Now, with time exposures, especially with film, we don't have the instant feedback that we get with digital. So what you do is you take an image, you put your camera on a tripod, you keep the shutter open for how long? Nobody knows, because light meters were never very efficient at very low light levels. So you try different amounts, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 16 seconds. And then one of those is going to be right, and then you throw the rest away after you get it 2 weeks later. So this would try the different values for me. I built some circuitry that plugged into the calculator. This is one of the only calculators in the world that had input-output ports in the back. So you can plug in extra ROMs, you can plug in a barcode reader, you can plug in a printer and a tape drive. And this calculator got me through college, believe it or not, because you could store alphanumerics and it would keep everything even after you turned it off. That was unique in the world back then. Moving right along here. So I could hook it up to my camera. It would try different values for me. I would stay inside and sip hot chocolate while the technology did the work for me. That's what the hardware looked like when it plugged in. In addition to that, I had a darkroom, and this is one of the reasons I don't like film anymore, because I wasted too much of my life in a darkroom. So this calculator automated my darkroom completely. In addition to turning the enlarger on and off, in this case, it turned it on so I could focus accurately. I would then take 3 different light readings of the negative. One that was the whitest, the darkest, and the 18% grayest. And it would calculate the exposure time here and the polycontrast filter number that you use. So there was no more trial and error. I would make a perfect print on the first try. Not only that, but in addition to that, once you expose the piece of paper, you have to put it into 3 different chemical baths. And you always have to keep your eye on how long has it been in this bath? Is it time to change the other one? The calculator kept track of all that. So when it was time to move a print from one bath to another, it would make an audible sound. And there were different sounds depending on what bath you had to move it out of. So I could have 3, 4, or 5 prints in the trays and keep doing the creative work. And the calculator would do all the dog work for me. And it really, really helped. I talked about the speech synthesizer where I can make it talk like Stephen Hawking's wheelchair, telephone answering machine. One more thing I wanted to show you. Is it here? Okay, well, I don't have it here, but I had turned my calculator into a slide projector dissolve unit. Back in the days of slides, if you wanted to put together a multimedia presentation, that meant 2 slide projectors and one image would slowly fade off while the other one slowly faded on. Those are hard to make. And the commercial dissolve units that were available did not meet my needs, so I built my own. I built the hardware and I programmed my calculator in assembly language because you needed to have a very fast operation. I am probably the only photographer in the world who designed and built and programmed his own dissolve unit. But now, what's a dissolve unit? That's technology that no longer has a need. But I used to do it back in the old days.
Wow. So nice to hear all those stories. But they're not stories, they were real history, right?
Yes.
And the engineer, designer, and the scientist and everything.
I'm getting to that age where just in hindsight that seems impressive, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. All I did was solve problems using technology that I thought everybody was going to have. I give a whole nother talk about the inventions I had and my frustrated path in making those inventions reality. Um, there's a patent I have on a digital camera. If you take a picture with my camera, you'll be able to prove in court that the image was not manipulated by computer. So imagine photoshopping something and submitting it to the judge and say, look, here's proof that the person was at the scene of the crime. And you can no longer rely on a photograph for telling the truth anymore. And I decided that needed to be fixed. So I invented a camera. If you take a picture with this camera, you'll be able to prove that it hadn't been photoshopped. And I thought this was going to save the whole world. And as it turns out, after my patent was granted, Polaroid was interested in licensing this. Now, for those of you who are young, Polaroid used to be a big company like Kodak. They used to make film. Polaroid was interested. They flew about 20 members of top management out to California to hear me give a talk about this. They were talking about licensing it. But then Polaroid went out of business before they could do anything. Then Canon stole the idea. Then Nikon stole the idea. And because the patent was only granted in the US, my patent doesn't dissuade them from doing anything. Then I learned it was a NASA patent. So they're not in the business of defending intellectual property violations. So even if it was a US company that had violated it, NASA wouldn't have done anything. Plus, even if they did get licensing, I wouldn't get anything. So everybody stole my patents. I got nothing. Goodbye, NASA.
Oh no.
That's a whole other talk.
Wow. I wonder, did you design the shoe phone for James Bond?
No, there was another TV show that inspired it called Get Smart, and it was a satire of James Bond. By the way, I have the shoe phone here. Since we're not,
precious song here for you.
We're in no hurry to wrap this up, right?
No.
And do we have anybody left?
There you are. You are the Santa Claus who brings so many treasures to our eyes.
Oh, I'm happy to do this for you. This sat this was in a German telecommunications museum for 2 years, and they sent it back. This is the original. Now, just building a telephone wasn't the challenge enough. I was bored when I was in college. I chose the Nike running shoe because the sole was so thin. And again, this is before cell phones. Now, you look at a modern cell phone now, you say, so what? You can just put one of these in a shoe phone. No, those things didn't exist back then. This was the 1980s. So this, you pull off the sole, which protects it when you're running. And this is what it is. There's more features here than you normally find on a telephone. For example, there's only 12 buttons on the pad, but the original touch tone specification was for 16 buttons. You can dial all 16 with this. There is a neon bulb in there, which will flash whenever it rings. There is a polarity LED. It glows green when you have it plugged in correctly, but red if you have it hooked in backwards. The sound quality is superb, and this actually still works. But one day, many years ago, column 2 shorted out. So you cannot dial a number that has a 2, 5, 8, or 0 in it. But you can still talk and listen. You can still dial any other number, and it'll still ring. The grandkids played with this for a while. And the other shoe, as I mentioned, has tools in it. So you can plug it into the wall, which is what you need to do. This one here has... You see, this is the benefit for doing remote presentations. I wouldn't have brought this stuff if I gave a live presentation at your event.
You couldn't carry all these to Kuala Lumpur.
That's right. The folks at airport security will say, "What's this shoe?" So this one here, it plugs in. It plugs in the modular plug here, and the other end plugs in the wall. But if you didn't need that, alligator clips. So you have a modular plug on one side, and you got alligator clips on the other, so go here and here. This here is a Swiss Army knife with the plastic taken off. plastic taken off so it'll fit inside the sole. And I've got wire cutters and strippers over here. Everything that you would need to do on-site telephone repair. And the reason I did that is because when I was young, I was known for being the guy who played with telephones. And everywhere I went, people would ask me, Gary, my bedroom telephone doesn't work, or it rings but I can't dial out, or this is wrong. So I always needed these tools with me. So now I had it.
My goodness, you're the American James Bond.
Well, thanks. There's a T-shirt. There's a T-shirt I need to get, and it says, "The older I get, the better I was." I don't do these things anymore, but I can talk about them.
Yeah, it's good to hear all this and good to see them. Yeah, we won't be able to see this if you come to Kuala Lumpur, I believe.
Okay, I'll ship it ahead of time so the folks at the airport security don't give me a hard time.
Really. And you see, our audience are so impressed by you.
Oh, I haven't
and your
even looked at
looks.
that. Oh, what, the old looks or the new looks? Because they're a
No,
little
your
different.
looks. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
they're impressed by how you look now. You look wiser.
Well, thank you.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I think we got so much from you, Gary. Yeah.
Okay.
Is anything else you want to share with our audience before we say good night? No, yes, good morning to you.
It's good morning.
You're going to start the day.
I'm going to go back to bed after this is over. I will remind people to buy my books just because, they are the best. An interesting thing. I was giving a live presentation at KLPF in 2011 and 2013. I did it twice. And I was really amazed at how popular people seem to know me there. Even though I went home and I looked at the log of who was buying my books and what country it was most popular, nobody in Malaysia was buying them. I wonder how that happened. So if you don't want to buy the books, at least copy them from somebody who wants to file share. There's no DRM on these at all. And that's the last thing I'll say about it.
Perhaps the digital version is more popular.
It is, without question. 95% of the people who buy it, they buy the downloadable version, and they're available in 3 different formats. You pay one price, you get a PDF file which has no restrictions whatsoever. You can print it, you can back it up, you can you whatever you want. You also get a version for the Kindle, and you also get a version for any other e-readers. So you got the AZW3 and EPUB formats. All one price, all completely free for you to back up and do whatever you want. There are also print versions available, but they are far less popular because it's print on demand, and those tend to be expensive, especially for the color versions. But yeah, the instantly downloadable PDFs are my most popular format. And you can share them with your friends.
Yes, that's what we used to do when we're students. We'll buy and share.
Well, hopefully people now can actually buy them and support a starving photographer.
Yes. Yeah, I hope those of you who would like to follow Gary Friedman, you can go to his website. I think you can type it down later. Yeah, the FriedmanArchives.com.
I'll do it right now.
He has
FriedmanArchives.com, and it's loading.
And
now.
Gary has how many percent discount?
10% discount on the on the streaming seminar. Here are my images.
If you use the promo code KLPF 2020.
If you go to the seminars page, the link up here, there's a quick video introduction with me back when my beard was short before the quarantine, and then you click over here. It says get the streaming version, and then it takes you to the page. And if you enter the discount code KLPF 2020 when you're checking out, you get 10% off. But this is essentially the weekend, but it's been edited down so it's digestible. And you can, you don't have to absorb it all in one sitting. You can do it one chapter at a time. Anyway. So thank you for that plug. I appreciate it.
Great. All right. Thank you, Gary. Thank you. I think it's about time we're going to say goodbye to you. Yeah.
Okay.
And we have Wei Ping Ho. He says he hopes to see you next year. 2021 at KLPF 2021.
Well, if I start
Yes, we
sleeping,
all hope
if I
to see
start
you
sleeping now,
next.
if I start sleeping now,
Hopefully.
I can wake up in time for that.
Yeah. What is that?
No, I mean I have a year to catch up on my sleep, so I can wake up and be wide-eyed. That was a joke.
Oh, you mean you're gonna catch up on your sleep?
That was the goal. Yes.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you so much, Gary. It's really
Okay.
a lovely and wonderful time with you. This is really our Sunday night live with Gary Friedman. So, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, and goodbye,
Okay.
Gary. And ladies and gentlemen, goodbye and have a good night. Come back to our Facebook page, the Kuala Lumpur Photography Festival, KLPF, for more programs tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to take you on a virtual gallery tour at our website www.klpf.com.my. Okay, same time 4:30 p.m. we are going to visit the portfolio exhibitions. So those of you who are picked to exhibit in this gallery, please share with your friends and family. All right, that's all for us tonight. Good night. Good night, Gary. Okay,
Good night.
have a good day. Catch up on your sleep.
Okay.
Goodbye. Goodbye.